Welcome to the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with Seymour Bernstein from the film Seymour, An Introduction, moderated by Landmark Theater's Dan Gorski, recorded at the Landmark West LA. Have you sit over here. You know, how did this get started? How did Ethan Hawke come to you? What did he propose to you initially, and what were your first thoughts?
Well, you know, I met him at dinner. A pupil of mine invited us for dinner. My pupil called me and said, Ethan Hawke and Andrew Harvey will be there. And I said, and who are they? You know, I led a very sheltered life. I hardly ever went to the movies. So I Googled Ethan Hawke.
So you're not that sheltered. You're Googling.
Yeah. Oh, I'm very good with computers. Okay. And, of course, I knew when I Googled him, I had seen him very often in movies. I was a little in awe to meet such a famous person. And we sat together at the dinner table. And the only way to describe what happened is there was like an electric current between us, and with Andrew Harvey also. The conversation centered upon performing. And then, of course, that led to nervousness. And you heard what Ethan said. For quite some time, he has been suffering almost crippling stage fright. And I told him my feelings about that I never met a performer who didn't suffer stage fright. Of course, when performers aren't prepared, they suffer a nervousness from which there's no return. But when you are prepared, the nervousness takes a different form. It's an indication that you're responsible. So when my own pupils have to perform, they wake up in the morning and their stomach and their head change places with each other. So I tell them, now here's what you do. You go to a mirror, you look at yourself in the mirror, and you say, I have a right to be nervous. I'll tell you why I have a right. I'm responsible to the composers whose music I am recreating. I'm responsible to my teachers. I'm responsible to my own standards. I'm responsible to the audience. You want me to go on? So those are all the reasons why I have a right to be nervous. I was discussing this with Ethan. So you're not going to get rid of it, so just stop fretting about it. It's an indication that you really care about what you're doing, and you're about to do something superhuman. Performing is a superhuman activity. So if you stop fretting about it and spend all of your time practicing, guess why? So that you can perform your best in spite of the nervousness. And I also told Ethan, I asked him actually, what form does your nervousness take? He said, well, you know, sometimes I have a feeling I'm going to stop talking, meaning a memory slip. Well, many years ago, I told him that a poll was taken among very famous performers, and 80% of nervousness is due to a fear of memory slips. My heavens, I've had that experience 1,000 times on the stage, and sometimes I've had memory slips from which one recovers, right? So I told him the story that I once heard about one of America's great violinists, Michael Rabin. Sadly, he died in his 30s, but he was one of the great violinists of all times. I knew his accompanist. His name was Mitchell Andrews. And Mitchell told me that at the height of Michael Rabin's career, he suddenly got a phobia that he was going to drop his bow, and it started to affect his playing. So one night, he arranged with Mitchell Andrews and pointed to a spot in the score, and he said, right at this note, I'm going to let go of my bow. Well, he did. He let go of his bow. The audience stopped breathing. He picked up his bow, and he said, "What do you know? I'm still alive." And he started the piece over again, and he got rid of his phobia, never came back. What did Ethan do? He told me some months later. I was in the middle of a role, and I had this terrible feeling, I'm going to stop talking. So I stopped talking, and I let out a scream, and the audience thought it was part of the script. And he got rid of the phobia. So now, this is what happened. We had this intense discussion. We became comrades immediately. And now, and Ethan says to me, "We have to hear you play." Well, my pupil had a beautiful piano, but I said, I would rather play on my own piano. Come to my studio at another time and I'll play for you. Well, you know when that occurred? A year later. Ethan was making movies, and Andrew Harvey was traveling all around the world. So I couldn't get them to my apartment. Well, they finally came. Do you know how hard I had to practice?
Really?
Well, I didn't play in public for 37 years. So I practiced really hard. When I finished playing, Andrew Harvey is the one who started everything. He came up to me, and he was wiping away his tears. I was so touched by that. And Andrew Harvey says to me in his English accent, "Whether you wish to or not, Seymour, we're going to make a documentary on you. And Ethan is going to direct it." And I thought, oh my God, what is that all about? And silently I was thinking, now what do they want to do that for the likes of me? What's so special about me? I mean, I can name other pianists I think deserve more of a documentary than I do. But as time went on, I discovered that Ethan had read my book, With Your Own Two Hands. And the thesis of that book is a conscientious involvement in practicing and performing can make us not only better musicians, but better people. And Ethan caught on to that. And in subsequent Q&A sessions when we're together, it's a shame he wasn't able to be here tonight, but he openly says, we always think that our life influences the way we perform. But it never occurred to me, he said, that the opposite can be true. That my skills as an actor can actually influence my life. So that became the thesis of the documentary. It's all about a pianist. It's about me, right? But actually the piano in the documentary becomes a metaphor for life. And it's for all the audience members here, whatever your talent is, it doesn't have to be for professional reasons. You could have a passion for gardening, or you could have a passion for cooking. You could have a passion for taking photographs. Whatever that talent is, that indicates the essence of who you are. And so if you carry it far enough, it can influence your life. It goes in that order.
Since you've been showing this to audiences, are people approaching you and asking for you for advice now? And
Oh my goodness, you can't imagine. I can't get away from my email. Really? Yeah, it's very moving.
Oh, that's great.
Well, I can't. Everybody tells me the same thing. You know, it's so interesting that what they say is, we don't really know anything about music, but everything in the documentary pertains to me. This is what they all say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the books, certain books, The Inner Game of Tennis. A pupil of mine said, you have to read this book, The Inner Game of Tennis. It's all about playing the piano. And then another pupil said, oh, Zen and the Art of Archery, that's all about playing the piano. That book, Zen and the Art of Archery, had the most profound effect upon me. You know, this young man is studying with a Zen master who takes him through every discipline known to humans. And one of them was breathing. The student said, it took me 5 years before I learned to breathe properly. And I had the strangest feeling that I wasn't breathing at all. I had the feeling that I was being breathed. Whoa. When I'm really prepared as a pianist, and I have taken that music inside of me, emotionally, intellectually, and, physically, right? I have the feeling that I'm not playing at all, but I'm being played. The music is playing me. And I told this to Ethan. I said, listen, Ethan, I've heard you on the stage very often, and when you're at your best, you're not acting at all. You're being acted. The character that you have taken into yourself is actually acting through you. Isn't it interesting?
Do you still do master classes? And are you?
Of course. Oh, I teach more than ever.
Do you find certain students, over the course have similar issues, or are you still surprised by some of the students in what you have to kind of teach them?
Every student requires a different approach. So someone once asked me, actually a pupil of mine who teaches, they asked me, how do you know what to tell a pupil during a lesson? And I said, that's very easy. You just become your pupil. You take on the assets and the positive elements of that pupil, and then you'll know what to tell them. In other words, you have to identify with them. But that's what we do when we play music. We have to identify with the music. I think you heard me perform the Prokofiev Seventh Sonata, the last movement. Yes, I played that a great deal.
And do you remember the piano trios you played on those programs?
I do, with the Allsops. Ruth and Lamar Allsop.
Yeah, what about the Gotham trio?
Oh, the Gotham Trio. My heavens, you heard me play with the Gotham Trio?
Yeah, what year was this?
I was the violinist in the trio.
Are you Diana Stumner?
Yes.
That's awesome.
It's been almost 60 years.
Wow.
Diana, I'm absolutely stunned out of my mind. The audience should know that That was the first time I ever went on a concert tour sponsored by Columbia Artist Management. They got us all together, remember? Individually, and they rented a room in Juilliard where we were to practice. And they told us straight out, I don't know if they told you, but they told me straight out, we want to hear how you play together and also how you look together. We were all stunningly good looking. And I had to be taller than the two girls, right? Taller than Diana. And we performed for the agents during a Christmas vacation, remember? And of course, we were their stars. And they printed leaflets, and the leaflet said, a feast for the ears and for the eyes. They made a sex angle out of us. Diana, this is just amazing to have you in the audience.
And what about the musical pieces? Did you talk about some of that before you actually shot some of those scenes, or did those just come up in the course of the questions he was asking you?
I had no idea what music background Ethan was going to inject into the documentary. I was never consulted about the editing. He's apologizing to this day about that. But it's better that I didn't, because I think what Ethan did is a masterpiece. And you know, if I would say, now, Ethan, instead of that piece, could I have this? Another thing, when he was about to make the documentary, I said, Ethan, I only have one request. Please don't play music when I'm talking.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. I can't bear that. But you know what? It didn't bother me in the slightest when I saw the movie. But when you're a musician, you're ear conscious, right? Mm-hmm. So when I hear someone talking and there's music in the background, my ear is drawn to the music. Mm-hmm. The worst things happen to me when I'm invited for dinner on the rare occasions when I accept the invitation. And while I'm having dinner, they think that they're promoting their best feeling by playing Beethoven sonatas on their phonograph or their CDs, and I'm going crazy. I'm trying to eat and digest the food, talking to them, and listening to Brendel interpreting Opus 111 and wanting to say, how could you play a phrase like that? You know, all of this. Right? It's murder for me when I hear music.
Well, one of the things I really actually enjoyed was when you were talking about the pieces as you were playing them and as the students were playing them, and talking about the notes, the individual notes, and moving between the notes.
Now, in the master class,
yes.
You know, you have to do that. Now, did you ever hear a pianist talk out loud while they're practicing? That doesn't happen. So one day, Ethan, you know, the audience should know there was no script, no rehearsals, no plan whatsoever from one shoot to another. I never knew what Ethan was going to ask of me. He purposely did that. He wanted this documentary to be a spontaneous event so that it just, like I'm talking to you. See? I have no idea what I'm going to say. It's conversation. So one day he arrived in my studio, and you know when they set up the cameras and the lights and everything, there were cables all over my apartment. I couldn't even go to the bathroom. It was like an obstacle course. So this was about the 10th shoot. And by that time, I was completely at home with all of the staff. So on this particular occasion, Ethan perches in the corner of my studio, and he asks the camera to be facing me this way. See? I'm wondering what's going to happen. I'm sitting at the piano. I have no idea what's going to happen. Ethan says to me, Seymour, I want you to practice for the concert you're going to give to my theater group, and I want you to talk out loud while you're practicing. Ethan, I never talk out loud while I'm practicing. Well, don't you have a running commentary silently in your mind? I said every moment. Well, make it audible. Speak it out loud. That's how the documentary began. I'm practicing, right? I miss an interval. I overshot the runway. I say, right? That was all spontaneous.
Did that make you more nervous performing? Was it like a performance for you, or were you less nervous?
I had no nerves at all. This was a famous actor making a documentary on me. By the way, have you ever met any person who became a movie star at the age of 88? I'm going to be 88 next month.
Wow. It's never too late.
With the first time they came into my studio for the first shot, the first shooting, they call it, I was spooked out. I couldn't imagine what was going on. After a while, I had no nerves whatsoever. I have no nerves now.
You have no
while
reason.
I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly used to it. If there were cameras all over here, I wouldn't be fazed at all.
Right. The
You
performance
mean-
in the Rotunda, what did you learn from that performance?
You mean the actual recital?
Yes.
By the way, that's going to be released separately. You know, you only heard parts of it here. But the entire recital has already been edited, and it's going to be released in a separate a DVD along with the movie. Once the theater run is over, they're going to release these DVDs. So your question is, how did I relate to that?
What did you learn from the experience of performing again, but also about the Brahms Intermezzo, if you could talk about that?
Talk about the Brahms Intermezzo and what you learned from that performance after not performing for so long.
I didn't learn anything more from that. It was a revisiting to my former performing life. It was going back to it. And if I learned anything, it was that we perform the way we practice. Because in order to reunite myself with an audience and have a public performance after 37 years, that was pretty difficult for me. So the only way that I was going to survive was to go back to practicing 8 hours a day. And I prepared for that concert just as I did when I made my New York debut many years earlier. But I did survive. And you know, when you get older, when you reach my age, you stop telling stories and no more lies. You say things the way they really are, right? So why don't you ask me how I thought I played?
How do you think you played at that performance?
I thought it was gorgeous.
Yeah, talk about the breathing for a pianist. How did that come about?
Oh, well, you know, I read a lot of books about breathing and the effect it has on humans. And do you know that scientists tell us an organism that doesn't breathe properly doesn't feel properly. In other words, they can't express emotion unless you breathe properly. So this is a crucial part of my teaching, and it ought to be a crucial part for all performers. And not only in performing, but any activity that requires your deep emotional projection has to come from the proper breathing.
Oh yeah, do your neighbors hear you playing in your
Now
apartment?
look here. I have another book called Monsters and Angels, Surviving a Career in Music. It's a memoir. I urge you, since you asked that question, I urge you to get a hold of that book, and you'll see the nightmare I had for 5 years with the former landlady who lived in the basement apartment. I had a very low rental because it was a rent-stabilized apartment, and she wanted to get rid of me and raise the rent. See? So she started with her husband. They were two monsters, and they started a 5-year campaign of harassing me. And the long story is told in that book. And you know how it ended? I won, and she sold the house and moved out. And I've been living in peace ever since.
Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today, and thank you so much for sharing yourself with us in this movie.
Thank you so much.